Welcome to the first video in my new series, Break Room Chats. Because I don't know about you, but for me, the best talks I've ever had with my coworkers have happened at 2 a.m. with a cup of coffee in the break room, kind of by accident. And the goal of these chats is just gonna be to come together and talk about things that no one's really talking about. It's out there, you talk about them with your coworkers at 2 a.m., but let's talk about it with each other. In them, I'll share some of my experiences about the hard stuff that comes along with nursing, being a mom, just life. And I hope that you guys will share too, and we'll get the word out there, and we'll all just feel a little bit less alone and like we're in this together. So I want you to go, and seriously, go, grab yourself a cup of coffee. This is my coffee in the everlasting heat mug. It's from 4 hours ago, and I'm gonna drink it. It's totally full. I have a toddler. But go, grab yourself a cup of coffee, come back, and let's chat. And today we're gonna start off with a bang. We're gonna jump right into violence in nursing. You got your coffee? We're gonna need it, I feel like, to get through this conversation. So violence in nursing, let's talk about it. And I'm not talking violence like nurse to nurse. We can always talk about that at a different time. But I'm talking violence against nurses from patients. Just a warning out here, a lot of my videos, I try to show like my tips, my tricks, how I survived nursing school, how I got through NP school. Guys, this doesn't have a lot of tips. This is just kind of talking about it because we need to talk about this. This is something that has been going on for decades. And I feel that in the last couple of years, it's just getting worse and worse, but no one's talking about it. Today, I'm gonna share some of my experiences just in a hope that this will start some conversations. This is a topic that isn't glamorous. It doesn't make you want to jump up and down and be like, yes, I can't wait to be a nurse. It just kind of stinks, but it's the reality of the situation. And I feel like we hide our students from it a lot. Because I know in school, I wasn't prepared at all for the violence that we would experience as a nurse. It was very glossed over. And I don't feel like we do our profession any service by sweeping it under the rug and pretending like it doesn't happen when tens of thousands of nurses in this country know it is. And what kind of really got me thinking about this a lot more was somebody asked me in a recent Q&A I did with my mom on here, would I want Avery to be a nurse? And I said no, and my mom was asked if she thought she wanted me to be a nurse, and she said no. And it was interesting because our answers were no for the exact same reason. My mom had seen the violence against nursing and how it's kind of a challenge a lot of the times to be a nurse. And she didn't want that for me because you don't want that for your baby. And that's exactly why I said it, is I know the physical violence that has occurred to me because of nursing, and you don't want that for your kid. And I think that just spoke a lot because then I was really evaluating, you know, like I love my job. I loved when I worked at the bedside. I love being a nurse practitioner. But wouldn't it be great if we could start talking about these things and maybe find a solution? If everyone just starts talking about it, we could come up with a better solution so that you could want your children to go into this field without being afraid for them. And like I said, guys, let's make this a discussion. I am not trying to discourage you from being a nurse. I wouldn't trade my experiences for the world. With that disclaimer, let's get into talking about it. Ready? So when I first started, my first nursing job was on an adult med-surg floor that did a lot of liver, kidney failure, GI, and then surgery. And I just want to throw out there that the different type of units that you work on, you're going to have totally different experiences. My experience working on the liver floor was 1,000% difference than working on a peds floor. Both I experienced like violence in them, but it was very different. And depending on where you work, you're going to have more or less just based on the population. So just throwing that out there. So my experience was on a floor with a lot of GI, liver, kidney patients. There was a lot of confusion. Liver patients can become encephalopathic. You have alcohol withdrawal, drug withdrawal. Those can tend to be a little bit more violent and a high stress. So for the sake of conversation, let's just talk about some times that I have experienced violence at my job. And I want you guys down in the comments to just like comment, have you been through this? You can just say yes. If you feel willing to share, then share. Let's make this a conversation so that we don't feel like we're going through this alone, because I feel like a lot of the times you're just like, oh, it's just me, it's no big deal. You know what I mean? Like I've played that off more times than I can even fathom of like, it's no big deal. Everyone deals with this. Everyone goes through this, and it's just not something you talk about. It's part of my job. Let's talk about it. So if you feel comfortable, I would love it if down in the comments you kind of just shared your experience. Share this with a friend. Let them know that we're talking about it. So my experience with it. I was a brand new, obviously, baby nurse. I had just graduated and I was still on orientation. And I'll never forget, I know the room I was in, I remember because I was like, what have I gotten myself into? My patient was an older woman. She was confused, she was sundowning. It was early, very early, like 1 a.m. I told her she could not get out of bed, and she whipped her hand up and she slapped me across the face. And it took everything in me to not, like, you know, when she raised her other hand to do it, like to like smack her back. I'll be honest, like that sounds terrible, but your gut reaction when someone hits you is to protect yourself and kind of like hit them back. You're like, no, what are you doing? And my preceptor was with me, and she was really the one that she was like, Liz, no. She just gently grabbed her other arm and she said, you just have to take it. And I remember we went out and we sat in the break room, just like we're doing now. And she said, you are going to get hit probably every single day at your job. That's just being a nurse. She's like, you're gonna have to get used to it. And I was like, well, what do we do? She was like, well, nothing. Like, it's just part of the job. And I just remember being like, okay. And at first I was so not okay with it. I was like, what do you mean I'm just gonna get hit every day at my job? She was like, we're on the forefront, you know, for a lot of violence, and we're the people that are the forefront with the patients. So we get the aggression towards us a lot. And at first I was so against it. And it's amazing what you get used to, because within a few weeks, really, you know, you just kind of were like, okay, like I'm being hit, slapped, you know, kicked, but it's not a big deal. Like, I'm not going home with any major injuries. And you just kind of get in that framework of mind, like, this is my job. Like, of course this is going to happen. When you oriented new people, you heard yourself giving that same speech, you know, like, as long as you're not really hurt, this is okay. And I hate that. I hate that that's what became of our language, was patients are gonna swat at you when they're annoyed. Patients are gonna kick you when they're mad. Like, they're just a little bit confused. But are they confused? That's the whole like challenging part about it. Other things I've had pretty much everything in the book happen to me. You got spit on at least once a week. You got kicked when your patient didn't want something and you were in there, you know, when they couldn't get to you with their arms. Hit. And these aren't just like, these are like, boom, hit. I would have bruises all over my arms, on my shins. I've had patients who knew they had Hep C and HIV threaten to stab me with a needle that they had poked in themselves if I didn't give them more Dilaudid. I had one time had a patient who, he was a liver patient, but he was one that you like really, I really think he was really with it. He used the fact that he was waiting for a liver transplant as his caveat to say I wasn't in my right mind, but he was so violent to nurses that people would cry before going into his room. He one time swung an IV, picked his IV pole up and hit me over the head with it. And violence comes in many different forms. I've had other patients who were very with it mentally, who wanted more pain medicine, and I couldn't give them any more. And they pulled poop out of their diaper and threw it at my face. I ended up getting preseptal cellulitis, moving to like optic cellulitis. So I had cellulitis on my optic nerve, and I can't wear contacts anymore because if I ever get an infection in my eye, since my nerve is already damaged, I could go blind. I've had patients multiple times threaten to kill me, and that is an unnerving thing. In my NP clinicals, I've had patients who, when they didn't get their opiates, screamed that they were gonna go get a gun and make us all regret our decisions. I've seen patients chase nurses down the hall with scissors, where the nurse ended up hiding in the med room. And that's not even jumping into the amount of verbal abuse that you get. I feel like that, and here I'm gonna say it again, like that comes with the territory. People say horrible things. I've been called every single name in the book. People take it out on nurses because you are the forefront of it. Not to say they don't take it out on providers too, but they're nasty. People are manipulative and they just scream, you know? They just scream and yell, and it's hard. So those are some of my experiences. If you guys have had any, honestly, let me know. Like I've said, I feel like so many times already, we need to talk about this, because you hear about the major stories on the news, but like the little stories every day where you go to work and you expect to get hurt. And that's crazy. So let's talk about really quick kind of the types of patients that this is happening with. Obviously, some people really are. They have altered mental status. It is because of something going on with them. It is their disease process. So some of that would include, you know, if they are a liver patient and they do have encephalopathy going on, they're not thinking straight. If you're in a ton of pain, if you're delirious, if you're confused. In pediatrics, we saw a lot of autism And that was heartbreaking because the parents would bring their child in because their child, due to the nature of their disease process, cannot communicate effectively. And so sometimes these kids would express themselves with violence because they did not know how to communicate. But that violence was, you know, these kids are 17, they weigh 200 pounds and they're kicking and screaming and they are strong. And the nurses, you're the ones that are supposed to go in and help. And that's scary. So it's all types of patients. And then it's patients that you know, and I'm not trying to sound callous, but patients will claim later if there are some kind of investigation that they were confused, and you just know. You're like, no, like I literally see you interacting and I'm with you all the time. So I know what your confusion looks like. And I really don't believe in my heart that you were confused when you chased me down and hit me over the head with an IV pole. Like, I don't think you were, but that's not obviously our call. So next, let's just talk about how we were kind of prepared for this, because I don't know about your nursing school experience, but mine, we talked about it probably for 30 minutes and we talked about it only during psych, which I thought was fascinating because I actually felt one of the safest when I was doing my psych rotations, and I was very rarely fearful when dealing with psychiatric patients that we had on our floor. It was the medical patients that scared me more, or the patients' parents, or, you know, it wasn't the psychiatric patients, but that's where we talked about it in school for like half an hour maybe. And we were just taught to keep yourself between the door and the patient, and so that you could always leave. And I think that's a good tool, but that's all they said. There was no real other conversation about how this is happening, how you can kind of handle it, how it's going to be emotionally taxing. And I think it's something you find out when you get into it, and that's a terrible way to teach people. Like, let's go into this with our eyes open so that we can handle it and we know what we're getting into. So let me know too, like, did your school prepare you? Because my school was great. I loved my nursing school, but this is, I think, a failing I've seen across the board in most schools is I mean, you don't want to tell a room full of students that, but then you're just sending them in and they're like, what is this? And that's not really any better. So with work, when you go into your hospital, most of the hospitals will prepare you by, they will have like a little mini session usually during orientation. Hold on, I need some coffee. And during your orientation, they'll have like a thing where they talk about security, and security is wonderful. These people, I cannot imagine their job, you know, because you're calling them when you're in a situation where you're like, I don't know what to do. And they always come and help. But a lot of the times with security, the damage has already been done. You call security because they already hit you over the head, or they've already stabbed you with something. And patients do stab people with dirty needles. That happens. I have seen so many people come to our floor later in life who were physicians and nurses, and they now have Hep C and they're dying because they got stabbed with a dirty needle at their job. So, but with situations like security is great, and they do come and they're usually very fast, but sometimes, a lot of the times it's already done, or you don't call them when your patient's just like hitting you necessarily because they don't want something done. If they're confused, because what are they gonna, you know, like there's not enough security people for the whole hospital when you have combative patients. There's just not. And the hospital on their end tries to prevent it by, you know, all of the implementation of red light, yellow, green light, where like, you know, try to look at your patient's cues, which is great. And they want you to de-escalate a lot with words. I'm like, have you ever had someone who like out of nowhere you said no and they slapped you in the face and you just tried to de-escalate them with words while they were swinging still? Like, they're beyond words, okay? They are beyond that point. But we're so moving away from obviously restraints, because the literature has come out and said, you know, restraints aren't great, obviously, and they can be very misused. And we want to therapeutically communicate to de-escalate patients, but you can't therapeutically communicate with someone who's in that mental space sometimes. So it's kind of a catch-22, and I don't know what to do about it. So why is nothing being done? I don't know. Largely, I think maybe it's because this is seen as coming with the territory. You know, you're dealing with ill people, and a lot of ill people are confused or agitated. This is the worst time of their life. And so however their reaction is kind of accepted. And some people, I mean, how are you going to? If people are confused, there's no accountability there. You know, you can't hold someone accountable for their actions when they're sick. If charges are ever pressed, in my experience, they all never come to anything, because the patient will always claim that they're ill. And I mean, that's fair. They are ill. And they'll always claim altered mental status. And nothing happens. So after a while, you know, you stop complaining. You stop saying anything because nothing happens. And that's something I really struggle with. I think everyone struggles with it. How do you draw the line between altered mental status and someone who's just really mean and, you know, feels like they have the upper hand in the situation and can control people like this? And there's no answer. There's no test that you can give people to be like, yep, you are just a horrible human and you are sick. And I'm sure part of it has to do with money. You know, the hospital can't go around investigating and suing all these people who are hurting nurses because they only can pay for so many lawyers and you would go totally bankrupt. I think, and initially I know in my practice, I wrote incident reports because that's a good way to write about things that are going on that are unsafe. And when you're 6 months into writing incident reports on things like this and nothing happens because no one knows because like I said, what can they do? You stop because nothing's happening, it takes time, and there's no perceived point. Another thing that I think is really hard with all of this is the healthcare industry is so quickly falling and bowing to things like Press Ganey surveys and patient satisfaction surveys. The whole mentality that the patient is always right. But guys, a hospital isn't a retail store. It's not McDonald's. The patient isn't always right. So why are we rewarding hospitals, paying them more when they value patient opinions over the opinions of their healthcare professionals that they employ? That, I think, feeds a lot of the powers back to the patients, where they feel that they can do whatever, and the nurses in the hospitals bow to it because you want to get the good scores. You don't want to say anything. Yeah, sure, walk all over me, call me that name, but make sure you give me 5 out of 5 on that Press Ganey when you leave. And that terrifies me because I think that's been a total shift in the power, where the hospitals, you know, they want money, they want patients. And so they're starting to value things maybe other than nurses and nursing safety, because if you start, you know, standing up and saying this is unacceptable to patients, they're not going to be happy. But maybe I'm totally off the mark on that one, but that I feel is a huge factor in it. The interesting thing with the whole the patient is always right theory is retail stores with the customer is always right mentality, they can kick you out of their store. Hospitals can't kick you out. Public hospitals can't kick you out when they decide that your behavior is unacceptable. So we give the people the power. We say, yeah, you're in charge. You're always right. And then we let them stay because we can't make them leave. And that, I think, is an interesting power over healthcare providers that patients have. So the constellation of all of that, and I'm not trying to be depressing, guys, but I want to talk about it. And I've wanted to talk about it for a long time, but it's scary. It's scary to put this out on the internet. I'm not trying to be negative. I'm just trying to talk about it. And I'll reiterate one more time, I'm not trying to scare you out of being a nurse because I love it and I wouldn't change a thing. I would do it all over again. I think it could be better, you know, if we talk about this, it could be better. And I'll be really honest, this is what made me leave med-surg. People have asked, you know, why'd you leave so quickly? I hit my deadline of like, you have to stay on the unit this quickly. And it was because of the violence. I was so tired. That floor was so heavy on violence towards nurses. And I was so done. It was right after I got the cellulitis thing. And I came home and I told Joe, I was like, I am done. The second I had hit my mark on that floor, I'm gone. I'm done. And I left. And that's obviously not very sustainable because to the nurses who have a lot more gusto than I that stay on those floors, that's not fair to them. And then I went to peds and there was a whole different type of it. So it's never ending. So I never like to do any video with totally leaving you in the dark and just being like, well, that's that terrible situation, good luck. So I'll share some of the tips that I've learned along the way to help me kind of cope. They don't alleviate everything, but they do, I think, help you kind of get through it a little bit. Number one is huge. I can't stress this enough, is use your gut. If you are standing out there, and I mean, you will feel it, and you're just like, it's a dread. It's like, I don't want to go in that room. Something makes me feel very apprehensive to even approach this. Listen to it and go get a buddy, because the buddy system is so helpful. Like when I was new and my preceptor was able to grab her arm and kind of pull me back, you need that. You need someone else there to help you in physically violent situations, and then you're tipping the ratio. There's 2 of you, there's 1 of them. It just makes sense. The second one is keep security up to date and be proactive with them. So for example, if I was in charge and I saw that we were going to be admitting a alcohol withdrawal patient who was entering their, they were past the 24-hour period and we're getting into the scary zone, I would just call them and let them know. And security, at least in my hospital, hopefully in yours, they rounded every now and then. They just walked by, and sometimes they would round a little bit more often on your unit and walk by that room specifically, just to kind of show their presence, which I think is sometimes helpful with patients who are going to become agitated like that, because then they know there is a presence here, so there will maybe be repercussions if something happens. Keeping them in the loop, hey, they're becoming more agitated, we're treating it, but they're becoming more agitated. Just keeping them in the loop so that they know going into it and it's not a total shock. 3, like they said in nursing school, keep the door on your side. 4, if you are worried about that, just make sure you can see their hands. Don't approach them maybe if they have their hands tucked under the blanket, if they're doing something like that, where you're worried, what do you have in your hands and could it hurt me? The next one is just don't show them that you're scared. If you show fear, they're going to absolutely use that. They're going to be worse, I feel, than if you went in with confidence and showing that, you weren't afraid. You have your buddy, but you're not meek, because they feed off of that. That's what they want, is they want that reaction. They want to feel in power. And if it is someone with an underlying disease process, it works the same way, but in a different way. Like they're acting out because they are panicking, because they are trying to express themselves. They do not know what's going on. So you going in with a calm, confident presence always helps. I always tried to just take a deep breath, no matter how terrified I was on the inside, and go in at least exuding calm and confidence. De-escalation is my next point, can work if you catch it early enough. Not with everyone, like I said. People who are gonna be mean and awful are gonna be mean and awful, but some people can be de-escalated. And my last one would just be to document it when you can. We're not talking about it, so document it, report it, even if you feel like it's going nowhere. And I'm guilty of this. Let someone know this is happening, even if it doesn't seem to go anywhere. All right, so I feel like I just word vomited all over you. That's been my experience with violence in nursing, at least a little snippet of it. And I want to know from you guys, like, have you experienced this? Is this something that you've seen? Have you experienced it? Let's talk about it. If you don't want to talk about it here, tell someone about it. Nothing will happen if we keep pretending like it's not happening. If we keep these conversations between ourselves in the break rooms, but never break it outside, they're not going to know, because the world sees what we want them to see. And we don't want them to see this usually. And if you guys are nursing students and you're watching this, because I know a lot of you are, I just want to say one more time, I know I've said it quite a few, that I love my job. I love being a nurse. I would choose it again and again and again. I don't want to discourage you. I just want you to go in eyes wide open so you know how to handle it and you're not totally sidelined. It is a great career. There are so many more great people than there are negative. I promise. Like I said, let's talk about it so we can fix it. All right, that pretty much wraps it up. If you guys liked this, please let me know. Leave a comment down below, like something, just so I know, should I make more like this? Do you want to talk about the hard stuff? Do you want to keep it more light? What do you want? I have a few more ideas for things in a series like this. If you guys like them and want to hear more, I'm super looking forward to, not for necessarily the content of it, but just the dialogue that I think we can have in videos like this. So let me know, do you want to meet me back in the break room? Do you want to have more chats? I did not drink enough of this coffee. That was my goal and I just failed. Or do you like my usual more, Liz style videos? If you guys are brand new here, I'm Liz. I'm a family nurse practitioner and I make weekly nursing videos. And on Saturdays, I have a vlog that just documents my life as a nurse practitioner. You like this or that sounds interesting to you, consider subscribing below. I'd love to have you on my adventure, and join me over on Instagram where I post all sorts of goodies and tips throughout the week. I don't think we're gonna do a question of the day on these because I just wanna talk about what we were talking about. So let me know, leave a comment down below if you've experienced this, how you've dealt with it, what you've seen, and if people around you are talking about it. I would love to continue the conversation down there. Again, let me know if you liked this or if you're like, never again, Liz, never again. Thanks so much for hanging out with me today. I hope you have a wonderful rest of the week and I'll see you next time. Bye.